Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night, when he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?"
Here's another translation of the "wear me out by continually coming" phrase you just heard the judge say. In my Bible it says, or another translation is, "so that she may not finally come and slap me in the face." So agitated and so demanding is this particular woman that she received justice as she believes it should be rendered, that the judge decides it's just not worth his trouble to have to look around corners every day waiting for her to finally do him harm. So he goes, "What do I care? I don't care about anybody or anything else but myself, and this is in my interest, so sure, I'll give it to her." So what does this have to do with faith? I'll give you a hint. Don't go down the road of Matthew's passage where it says a certain person. It's the same story, but it's told differently in Matthew. Same point. A certain person went to his neighbor in the middle of the night and knocked on the door. The neighbor came to the window and said, "What are you doing here? My family's in bed and I'm asleep. Go away." And he says, "But someone from out of town has come unexpectedly, and I need food and I have nothing. Please give me some bread." And he says, "No, everyone's tucked in. I'm asleep. Everything's great. You'll have to deal for yourself. I can't help you." And then the parable goes on to say, this person will surely give this friend everything they want because of his persistence.
I'm sure because it's a widow,
Okay.
that makes a difference.
And what significance is the
They're
widow?
not usually listened to.
Yeah, what significance would the widow be, Bob? From what you
One
know?
of the lower class
Yes,
people that wouldn't usually have a voice.
yes. These are the little ones. The Hebrew word is anoim. The little ones that caused all the exile to occur to begin with, because there was so much injustice being perpetrated on these little ones. That God couldn't stand it anymore and said, "Look, I'm tired of sending prophets and telling you the same thing over and over again. You're not going to listen to me, so more drastic measures are required." So you're right. She's one of the little ones. So her persistence isn't a bad thing. Now she's rewarded for her persistence.
Right. And she's listened to by God.
Well, she's listened to by this judge. Now the question for you is, where is God in this passage? Is God in this passage anywhere? Is God the judge?
That wouldn't make much sense, because God doesn't act like the judge.
No, that's true. God cares about people and has a sense of justice and righteousness.
Bye, Susan.
Bye, Bonnie.
Bye.
This judge is very arbitrary. Whatever seems to be in the judge's best interest is the way the judge rules. So is God in the passage at all? That will help us figure out perhaps the point of it. Is God a character in this parable?
The contrasting character
The contrast?
from the judge.
Oh, okay.
Motivation-wise.
Okay. Sure, because the passage speaks of God as if God's outside of this whole thing.
Yeah. But if you really believe that what a lot of the scripture seems to teach about God opening and closing the hearts of people, then the answer would be, well, of course, what's in this? And what is the lesson that's there?
Sure. I said awful stuff can use time and again for something beautiful, even though the awful thing happened. something beautiful comes out of you. And I'm not sure I understand when Jesus points to the beggar at the gate, and the disciples say to him, well, who sinned, this guy's parents or him? So, of course, that was the prevailing thinking again, right? Somebody's teeth were set on edge, and so this kid is paying for it. And Jesus says, no, you don't get it right. This is for the glory of God. And I always wondered, what does that mean? How could subjecting someone to that sort of suffering somehow manifest the glory of God? Well, it's laid out there for us to sort through.
Yeah, I don't think of it in the exact way that you said it. In other words, the condition didn't happen because of God, but God in that person's condition revealed God's glory.
Sure, that's fair. But it doesn't, I don't, for me anyway, it doesn't answer it any better. But
Right.
it puts it in a better context.
But it's like when we're learning about turning women's into lemonade.
Yeah,
You know, it's that worldly teaching. It applied scripturally.
Sure.
It's about that God takes the bad things in our life, and we learn through those sufferings that God is the God that wants us to suffer, but in our sufferings, not only does God walk with us, but we can become much closer in our
Right.
understanding, in our prayer, our faith, and a sensitivity to others. And so
so it pushes back into the Jeremiah passage in a sense and say, we choose. We choose how we measure our best days, and we choose how we measure our worst. And our worst days could be a horrible affront to our person that we just never get over.
Right, or we could take it and make an opportunity of,
Or after we've shook our fist good and hard and called out all kinds of names because God said, hey, this is what I've allowed to happen in terms of life, so
right.
you get to react to it with what I gave you, and that's part of us, so we go.
And I've done that, but even in learning, even in having done that and being surprised that I did that, it was a humbling good experience to see that you really, yeah, that's you, that was you.
Well, you went somewhere with it, you're just staying put.
Right, but I mean, it took a while. I mean, I literally did raise my hand in a fist.
Yeah, I've done it.
Yeah, I was very angry,
I told others to do it.
So,
So why don't you want to do that? Oh, that's just not right.
yeah,
I'd say, why is that not right? Did you feel those things? Sure. God make you good according to the Bible, right? Uh-huh. So that's got to be good too, right? Well, maybe. So well then, go ahead and do it. You don't think God's big enough, can't handle that? Call it every curse word you can think of. Just go to town. You'll feel better.
well, and when you come around and you still sense the love of God and you find that again for yourself, that's where, when God says, when I come at the end, will I find faith? You know, so will you find that I'm still here for you? You know, will you be here for me?
Exactly.
So
I haven't gone anywhere, God says, but when I show up looking, will you be there ready to be found?
yeah,
Or will no one be waiting?
right.
It's the teeth on edge again. You will not be punished for one thing or another. You'll only be held responsible and accountable for what you decide to do. And even then, you can undo it. You're no longer held to some sort of eternal standard because of some mistake or some choice you made.
Yes, someone wrote on a piece of paper once, and I had it in my little mailbox, and they had read it from something else, and there's a little poetic thing, you may have heard it, it says something like, no more will I take pride in how I have a hold on you, but that how strong your hold is on me. You know? So, it's that kind of a thing, it's learning that no matter what you do and how many fists you shove in God's face, eventually you begin to see, God has a hold on you, and it all works out.
Well, this amplifies the Samaritan account last week of the leper that came back, the foreigner, right? Because Jesus is talking to Gentiles. And in these passages, community is a community of Greeks. And they're being reminded that even though they may identify very strongly, intentionally, with that 10th leper, that it isn't that easy. You don't just get that one opportunity of conversion and it's all good. You just, it's a slide right down to the promised land from there.
It's hard work.
Because you will be held accountable for your mistakes if you take stuff for granted. Even you can lose your standing, even though you have now provided God a brand new opportunity to join this family. You can still put yourself, and that's the key, you can put yourself on the outside. It's still possible.
Which you're not saying, you're not talking about the theology of once saved, only saved versus not, and the grace, and you just made that statement, I think.
No, it's a question of human choice.
Yeah.
The reality is consistent. Our position in that reality is entirely up to us. We recognize it or we don't live it. We live it or we don't live it. Doesn't mean we're faithless. It just means that we find faith, we don't lose it. I tried to believe that a couple weeks ago. Either you have it or you don't. And you can have it and still act stupidly. It's perfectly fine. It's human. Doesn't mean you lost anything. People say, I lost my faith. Well, no, you didn't. You just...
So what do you think then predestination, the scriptures about predestinations are saying in relation to what you're saying?
Predestination's heavy stuff. I mean, it's not easy to find. I've found in my life that faith's not easy to find, and it's equally not easy to lose. But you can feel what you feel. But I don't believe, myself, that it's a question of whether or not you lost something that you really have found. If you found it, you don't lose it. You can change, you can, be miserable.
Yeah, you're using words like find and lost, and when I'm hearing you talk in my own personal experience, what words come to my head is the closer you are to the flame, the hotter you are.
Okay.
And the further you get away, in other words, you're not in your scripture, you're not in your prayer, you're not in your devotions, you're not doing this kind of a thing, you're not talking to God, even though you're very aware, but you're like, I'm not talking to you.
Yeah.
Then you're way over here. You haven't really lost it, but the flame is not too hot.
What's that hot and cold game where somebody hides something, they say, oh, you're cold,
Yeah.
you're really cold, oh, you're getting warmer,
Yeah.
getting warmer.
Yeah. So I agree that you don't really lose your faith, but sometimes you just let go. You just keep going way over here, so it's hard to touch it.
Fire analogy is a good one. Stop tending it.
Yeah.
Well, even this one, the judge, he has no fear of God, but he still mentions God, so he knows about him.
Yeah.
Well, I think this may have been a nod to the, I don't know for sure, but my gut feeling is that it's a nod to the place of thinking and intellect in the Greek culture, which was huge. Paul ran into all kinds of problems later on when he started talking about resurrection. The Greeks asked him, logical questions. They were sitting around talking about this, right? And they came to Paul and said, we decided amongst ourselves that we have a question that needs to be answered before we're willing to accept this. Mm-hmm. He starts asking them whose body they're going to have. Paul's like, wait a minute. What? It's like, well, whose body are we going to have? Going to have our body? Is it going to be somebody else's body? Is it a different kind of, what's the body? Paul had this long theological dissertation he had to create. And I'm talking about soma in Greek, that sense of bodiliness, because they were just hung up about it. So I don't doubt that there may be some of that in here too. He just goes right to their heads and says, look, this guy's making the same kind of logical decisions that any one of you would make out of your own self-interest. And that's not right. If this woman gets justice for her, there's no question as to whether, there's no ultimate discussion as to what it was that she was asking to receive, and whether that was just or not. Just is that, well, just that it was her self-interest in her mind that this such thing should be given to her. And so she was relentless. Just from a character standpoint. Neither character, you don't get a sense of either character being...
Well, and she still still have hope, because if you don't have any hope, you won't keep asking.
Well, and
You
that's-
jump off the building.
It's not so much the character's motivation. Faith requires, again, this goes right back to last week with the lepers, right? The one who was made well was the one who demonstrates by their motivation that they have faith, that they've been made well. Don't get an indication here that either of these characters is ultimately made whole. But those who listen and understand the persistence and how to apply it, how one's to carry themselves in the sight of God, in their persistence as a person of faith, you will be made whole. But you can't necessarily take either of these characters as a role model for it. Because it's a demonstration of what one should learn from the world, and not necessarily how one just absorbs the world whole or just does something. It's like mimicking somebody else. If I just act like Marilyn, I'll be great. Because she's fabulous, and so I'll just follow her around and do everything she's doing. We'll both be great together because she's got it.
Yeah, so this is the other example about the parable with the dog and the crumbs.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, you know, you gotta give your dog the crumb off the cake. I mean, it's just, God is better than that.
Sure. But you can see that that's one of those times where Jesus admits he's wrong to the woman. Right? Why should I help you? Why should I?
Oh, I think he was,
You think he was just toying with her, huh?
yeah,
Seeing if she had it or if she didn't have it, if she understood what she was doing?
I think he was, just getting her time.
She was persistent, but her persistence was demonstrated. She knew what she was in the presence of, and she wasn't going to let go.
Yeah.
Until she was acknowledged as being part of the family. She wanted to be made well in the worst way, and she wasn't going to let go until. The dog analogy is interesting, even though it's an insult in our culture. But like a dog sort of grabs onto something and won't let go.
Right.
She was not letting go.
She knew.
Yeah, she knew what she was doing. Unlike this widow in this one, we're not sure what her deal is. We know she's persistent, but we don't know exactly what her case is. So you get lost. The point is you get lost if you walk away with just the sense that persistence is in of itself a virtue. Because this passage is not saying that, nor is the knock and ask passage in Matthew that covers the same ground. It's about who's knocking and why are they knocking and what are they asking for and what are they looking to find that is more important than the actual act of persistence and demand, request that occurs. You know what I mean? I'm saying it's what you bring to it that's
But who are you bringing it to?
who you bring it to. Attitude, where your heart's at. Is God in your gut? Go back to Jeremiah. Or are you like the majority of the crowd following Jesus around just looking for some entertainment and a square meal? Bread and circuses, as the Romans used to do. It's impossible to have a conversation like this on Sunday, especially when you've got some folks in the pew looking for what? Of this sort of depth. I had to find anybody to 15 minutes to try to explain what we just talked about. It doesn't make any sense anymore.